ሰላም ተኸታተልቲ ናይ ዘመደብ ንሎም ማዓንቲ ሒዘልኩም ዝመጻኹ ኣዝዩ ኣገድ ከመይ ትውዕሉ ተኸታተልቲ ናይ ዘመደብ ተስፋ ገብር ድምፂ ይስማዕ ክህሉ ንሎም ማዓንቲ እምበኣር ዓለምና ስለምንታይ በዚ ሰብ ትዛረብ ኣላ ካብ ኪስንጀር ይሓይሽ ሂትለር ዝተባሃለሉ ኣብ መበል 100 ዓመቱ ሎም ማዓንቲ ከም ዝሞተ ዝንገር ዘሎ ኪስንጀር መንዩ ገለ ድሕረ ባይትኡ ክንህበኩም ኢና እዚ ሰብ እዚ ዓለም ዘሰከሐ ክንደይ ህዝብታት ዘህለቀ ሰብኣዩ ነቲ ዞባና እውን ጽልዋታት ከም ዝነበሮ ዝፍለጥ ሰብኣዩ በዚኣ ጥቕስ እዚኣ እውን ካብቶም ዝፍለጡ ዝበሃሉ ሰብኣዩ to be an enemy of America can be dangerous but to be a friend is fatal ዝበለ ሰብኣዩ እንታይ ማለት እዚ ጸላኢ አሜሪካ ክትከውን ሓደገኛ እዩ ዓርካ አሜሪካ ክትከውን ከዓ ዝኸፈአ እዩ ወይ ከዓ ቀታሊ እዩ ዝበለ ሰብኣዩ እዚ ድገበሮ ዘዕነዎ ሚሊዮናት እዚ ዘይበሃሉ ሰባት እዩ ኣብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ቀቲሉ ንዑ ዝምልከት ዘዳናልኩም ሪፖርታጅ ፕላስ ካልእ ተወሳኺ ምስኡ ዝሓወስናልኩም ብዛዕባ አሜሪካ ትገብሮ ብዛዕባ ናይ ሰላምን ናይ ካልእን ትገብሮ ቲያትር ስካብ ሕጂ ይኸይድ ስለ ዘሎ ክትሪእዎ ከድልየኩም እዩ ብሓንሳብ ኮይና ንርአዮ ተንኪዩ ደቂረይ ተኽኢልኩም ላይክ ግበሩ ዋጋ ኣይክፈሎኒ ናብ ካልኦት ኣልጎሪዝም ምእንቲ ከብፅሖ ንርአያ ዳሲ መደብ ኣሎ ዓለምና ንምንታይ በዚ ሰብ እዚ ትዛረብ ዘላ መዓልታ ኣኺሉ ወይ ከዓ መዓልቱ ኣኺሉ ሞት ክናና ሞይቱ ዝበሃለሉ ዘሎ ሰብኣይ ኪስንጀር መንዩ ንዑ ዝምልከት ሓደ ዘዳለኹልኩም ጽሑፍ ወይ ከዓ ቪድዮታት ኣሎ ክሳብ ትውዳእ ምሳይ ጽንሑ ላይክ ግበሩ ክትወፁ ከለኹም ከዓ ሼር ጌርኩም መውፁ እዚ ሰብ እዚ ኣብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ዘይገበሮ ኣብቲ ፖሊሲታት ናይ አሜሪካ ዘይገበሮ ዘይቀየሮን ፀይቅታት ዳርጋ የለን ክበሃል ይኽእል ንኣብነት ካምቦዲያ ቦምቢንግ ልዕሊ 500,000 ሰባት ቀቲሉ እዩ ኣብ ኢስት ቲሞር ኢንቬዥን ሰፖርት 200,000 ሰባት ቀቲሉ ኣብ ቺለ ጋቨርንመንት ኦቨርትሮው መንግስቲ ምዕልዋው US backed Pinochet dictatorship, Bangladesh killing 3 million deaths, Bangladesh 3 million ዝኾኑ ሰባት ቀቲሉ አርጀንቲና dirty war ዝበሃል ረሳሕ ኩናት ዝብልዎ 30,000 ስጋብ ሞይቶም 30,000 ድማ ጠፊኦም disappeared ላኦስ bombing 200,000 deaths 200,000 ዝኾኑ ሞይቶም ኣብ ቪየትናም war ድማ ካብ 2.5 ስጋብ 3 ሚሊዮን ዝኾኑ ሰባት ሞይቶም እዚ ሄንሪ ኪሲንጀር ካብቶም ዝበሃሉ ብዛዕባኡ ድምልከት ሓደ ቪድዮ ዘዳለኹልኩም ኣሎ ብሓንሳብ ንርአዮ አሜሪካ ኣብ ትገብሮ ፀይቅታት ኣብ ፖሊሲታት ሃገራት ኣብ ምሕማስ እውን ንዑ ዝምልከት ዘዳለኹልኩም ሓደ ቪድዮ ኣሎ ሳብ ትውዳእ ምሳይ ጽንሑ
Henry Kissinger, one of the most controversial and powerful figures in American politics, is dead. Kissinger was an American diplomat and political scientist. He served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under 2 presidents. And his career is full of a lot. Some laudable achievements, such as normalizing relations with China, but also full of some actions that many call war crimes. Many of you watching are 100% positive that Henry Kissinger is a war criminal. Others might see Kissinger as a brilliant leader who helped the US navigate.
ስለዚህ ታይ ዝብል ዘሎ ሄንሪ ኪሲንጀር ብዙሕ ዓይነት ገጻት ከም ዝነበሮ እዩ ክገልጸልና ዝፍትን ዘሎ obviously ዝገልጽ ዘሎ አሜሪካዊ ምዃኑ ዘይምርሳዕ ነቲ ዝገበሮ ከዳዓስ ክፍትን እዩ እንተኾነ ግን ብዙሕ ነገራት እውን ዝተቆሶ ነገራት ስለ ዘሎ ኢና ምጽኦ ዘለና ምስ ቻይና ማለት እዚ ድብሎ ዘሎ ሓደ ካብቲ ፖዚቲቭ ዝበሃል ኣብቲ ሪሌሽንስ አሜሪካን ቻይናን ዝነበረን ኣብ ምዕርራይን አሜሪካ ኣብቲ ግዜ ኮልድ ዋር ኣብ ዝነበረሉ ግዜ 1949 ጀሚሩ 89 ኣካብ ዝወደአ ኣብኡ ነቲ ግዜያት ንክትሓልፎ ፖሊሲታት ኣብ ምቅያርን ምስ ሃገራት አሜሪካ ኣብ ምስላይን ዝለዓለ ተራካብ ተፃወቱ ሓለፍቲ ዝበሃሉ አሜሪካውያን እዩ ኪሲንጀር ደሃን ንርአዮሞ እንታይ ከም ዝብሉን ክንሰምዖ ኢና
Very uncertain times during the Cold War. I actually met Henry Kissinger once. I was working at a think tank in DC where he was a counselor and trustee. And frankly, I didn't glean much about this guy's character in our little meeting. But since then, we've gotten to know him, at least his career. We've studied him, his actions, both the good and the bad. So today, I want to look at this man, Henry Kissinger. I want to look at what he did and evaluate what we can learn from this person who, for better or worse, has played an influential role in how American power is wielded on the global stage.
On this, perhaps the most gentle and graceful land in all of Asia, President Nixon and Mr. Kissinger unleashed 100,000 tons of bombs.
Henry Kissinger was born on May
ልክ ሚስተር ኪስንጀርን ኣብቲ ሽዑ ግዜ ፕረዚደንት ዝነበረን ኒክሰንን ለ100,000 ዝኸውን ቦምብታት ኣብ በዓል ላኦስ ኢልካ በዓል ዝተፈላለዩ ሃገራት እዮም ሰንዲዮም መዓት እልቢ ዘይብሉ ሰብ እዮም ኣጥፊኦም ንኣብነት ኣብዚ ከም ዝሪኦ ዘለኹም ኣብ ካምቦድያ 500,000 ሰባት ከም ሞይቶም ኣብ ኢስት ቲሞር ከምኡ ልዕሊ 200,000 ዝተፈላለዩ ሃገራት ከምኡ እንዳገበሩ እዮም ዝወሩን ዘጥፍኡን ነይሮም ስጋብዚ ግዜ ድማ ኸይድ ከም ዘሎ ኣስተውዕሉ
27th, 1923 in Germany. When he was a teenager, his family left Germany for the United States, fleeing oppression from the Nazis. He went to Harvard and later was drafted into the army during World War II, serving in a counterintelligence role. After the war, he returned to Harvard and pursued a PhD in political science. Kissinger made a name for himself as a political theorist and author. He focused on the role of nuclear weapons and this new geopolitics that had emerged after World War II. He studied a political philosophy called realpolitik, which emphasizes how countries gain power by reacting practically to conflicts and situations, as opposed to based on ideology or values. But from my reading, what made Kissinger powerful was his ability to connect with people, to network in Washington, D.C. That was perhaps his greatest asset, and the thing that kept him close to power. This was later exemplified by the fact that Kissinger served under both Republican and Democratic presidents. You can start to see
ኪስንጀር ኣብ መንጎ ክልተቶም ዲሞክራትን እቶም ሪፐብሊካን ዝበሃሉ ንክልቲኦም ወይ ከዓ ክልቲኦም ብክልተ ኢዱ የካይዶም ከም ዝነበረን ኣብ ንክልቲኦም ሰርቭ ከም ዝገበሮም ከም ዘገልገሎምን እዩ ዝገልጽ ዘሎ ኖርማሊ ሓደ ሰብ ንሓደ ወገን እዩ ዘገልግል ናይ ኪስንጀር ግን ፍልይ ዘብሎ እንታይ እዩ ንክልቲኦም ነዞም ዲሞክራትን ሪፐብሊካትን ኣብ መንጎኦም ኣትዩ ጌም ይፃወት ከም ዝነበረ ንረብሕኡ ክብልን ንረብሓነቶም ላዕለዎት ዝምረፁ ሓለፍትን እዩ ዘርእየና ኣብዚ ኢንስቲትዩታት ዝተፈላለዩ ፖሊሲታት ይቀያይሩ ከም ዝነበሩን ዓለም ኣብ ኣሜሪካ ዝቕየር ሓድሽ ፖሊሲታት ከም ትንከፍ ኩሉ ግዜ መቸም ኩልና ንፈልጥ ኢና ስጋብ ሕጂ ስጋብ ዝሎምሎም ድማ ከምኡ ዓይነት ኣካይዳ ስለ ዝኸይድ ዘሎ ኢና ነምፆ ዘለና ድሓን ንርኣዮ ሞ እንታይ ዓይነት ጌም ከም ዝተፃወተ ኣብዚ ድማ ክትርእይዎ ኢኹም
Kissinger's realpolitik and networking skills in full action well before he ever stepped foot in the White House. According to this archived document from Nixon's chief of staff, early in his career when he was working for the Democratic president LBJ as an advisor on Vietnam, he cozied up to the Democrats' political opponent, Richard Nixon, who was running for president. So he cozies up to Nixon and conspires to pass Nixon information about secret Vietnam War peace talks happening in Paris. Nixon could potentially use this information that he got from Kissinger to prevent the peace talks from going well, which in turn would make the Democrats look bad, since they were the ones in power, and help.
ልክ ሕጂ እቶም ዲሞክራትስ ዝበሃሉ ኣብቲ ግዜ ኪስንጀር ዝነበረሉ መርሑ ነይሮም ኒክሰን ድማ ንፕረዚደንታዊ ምርጫ የካይድ ነይሩ ኣብዚኣታ ዝገበሮ ተንኮል እንታይ እያ እንድሕሪልኩም ቪየትናም ፒስ ቶክስ ወይ ከዓ ሰላም ናይ ሰላም ዝርርብ ይግበር ነይሩ ሕጂ እቶም ዲሞክራትስ ስለ ዝመርሑ ዝነበሩ ክሰዓሩ እውን ስለ ዝደልይዎም ዝነበሩ ነዚ ፒስ ቶክስ ከተዓናቅፎ ከም ዘለዎም እሞ እቶም ናይ ዲሞክራትስ ዝመርሑ ዘለዉ ድማ ሕማቕ ስእሊ ክህልዎም እሞ ካብ ኣሜሪካ ሕማቕ ሽም ረኺቦም ክንጸሉ እሞ ኒክሰን ድማ ናብ ስልጣን ክወፅእ ወይ ከዓ ስልጣን ንክሕዝ ይሰርሕሉ ከም ዝነበሩ ሕጂ ዝገርመካ ኣብዚ ኪስንጀር ንርእሱ ምስ ኒክሰን ኣይኮነን ነይሩ እቲ ክሳይ ምስቶም ዲሞክራትስ ኣብ ስልጣን ዝነበሩ ምስኣቶም እዩ ነይሩ እንታይ ዝገብር ነይሩ ንኒክሰን ናብ ስልጣን ከምፅእ እዩ ዝፅዕር ነይሩ ብድሕሪት ኮይኑ ንኒክሰን ናብ ስልጣን ኣምፂኡ ኣብኡ ኮፍ ከብሎ እሞ ነቶም ዲሞክራትስ ልክዕ ናቱ ዝነበሩ ንዕኦም ከውድቆም ነቲ ናይ ፒስ ቶክስ ዝኸይድ ዝነበረ ናይ ሰላም ናይ ቪየትናም ድማ ከተዓናቅፎ ኩናት ክቅፅል ይደልይዎ ከም ዝነበሩን ህዝቢ ይሙት ይጨፍጨፍ ግዴትኦም ከም ዘይነበረን ኢኻ ትርኢ ዘለኻ ባይ ዘ ወይ ስጋብ ሕጂ ኣብ ስጋብዚ ግዜ እዚ ከምኡ ይኸይድ ስለ ዘሎ ኢና ኣብዚ ደጋጊምና ነምፆ ዘለና
paved the way for Nixon to win the presidency. Now, there's a significant debate on whether or not all of this sort of backroom deal thing had any impact on the peace talks. But what I care about in this little story is what it shows about Henry Kissinger. That he was willing to go to these lengths to betray the president he was working for and to cozy up to a candidate who he hated but thought could potentially win the presidency, to pass on information that could potentially compromise the peace talks that might end the war in Vietnam. Anyway, the peace talks did indeed break down the day before the presidential election, no less. Nixon ended up winning. And Kissinger, this political theorist turned power-hungry...
ልክ እታ ዝደልይዋ ዝነበሩ እታ ፒስ ቶክስ ክትከይድ ኣይከኣለትን ከምዘይ ትኸይድ የንገሮም ኣኮነ ኢሎም ምክንያቱ ካብ ስልጣን ናብ ስልጣን ምእንቲ ክድይቡ ሞ ንሕና ከነዕርዮ ኢና ንሕንሳቶም ንስቶም ዲሞክራት ኣብ ስልጣን ዝነበሩ እሳቶም የመስ ዝገብሩ ዘለው ዘባላሽው ዘለው እንዳበሉ ወላውን ይጸልኦ እንተነበረ ኒክሰን ንዕኡ ግን ሰሪሕሉ እዩ ኪሲንገር ማለት እዩ ክሳብ ክንዱ እቲ ሰይጣናዊ ዝኾነ ሰራርሓ ባይ ዘ ወይ ክሳብ ሕጂ እዩ ከምኡ ዝቕጽል ዘሎ
networker had shown that he was willing to sabotage peace talks in the name of gaining favor in the eyes of a powerful man. Nixon appointed Kissinger as his national security advisor, giving him an unprecedented level of control.
በቃ ሽዑ ኒክሰን ኣብ ስልጣን ምስ ደይበ ፕሬዝደንት ምስ ሓዘ ድማ ኣብቱ ናቲ ሴኩሪቲ ኣድቫይዘር ዝለዓለ ኣድቫይዘር ጥራይ ገይርዎ ዘይኮነ ድላዩ ንኽገብር መሰል ሂብዎ
control over what he could use the American power machine to do on the global stage, all in the name of national security. Now listen, most of us weren't alive at this time, so we don't really know what this was like to live during the 60s and 70s, when kind of everything was about the Cold War and specifically Vietnam. So now you have Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon overseeing this war. It was a war that was no closer to ending. A war that, remember, these two conspired to lengthen so that together they could end it and score Nixon political points. And this leads us to perhaps the most infamous of Kissinger's sins. There's a reason why Anthony Bourdain said, quote, "Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands."
ልክ ኣብዚ ሕጂ እቲ ሓደ ኣብኡ ከይዱ ነቲ ናይ ካምቦዲያ ጉዳይ ዝረኣዮ ኣዝዩ ስለ ዘስካሕክሐ እዩ ንኪሲንገር ድሕሪ ናይ ካምቦዲያ ምርኣይካ መቕጥቃጡ ወይ ከም ሻሎ ሕማቕ ጌርካ ህረሞ ኸማኒ ዝመፀካ እቲ ዝገበሮ ፖሊሲታት እዩ ኢሉ ሕጂ ናይ ኪሲንገር ሓንቲ ኮት ወይ ከዓ ሓንቲ ዝበላ ምስላ እንታይ እያ ትብል ዘላ to be an enemy of America can be dangerous but to be a friend is fatal እንታይ ይበሃል ናይ ኣሜሪካ ዓርኪ ክትከውን ወይ ናይ ኣሜሪካ ጸላኢ ክትከውን ሓደገኛ እዩ ግን ዓርኪ ክትከውን ቀታሊ እዩ ፌታል ይዝብሎ ዘሎ thank you ንቐጽል
Because in March 1969, Kissinger directed the US Air Force to fly over Vietnam's neighbor, Cambodia, a neutral third party, and to drop bombs everywhere.
President Nixon and Mr. Kissinger unleashed 100,000 tons of bombs, the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas. The bombing was their
ልክ እቲ ኣብ በዓል ካምቦዲያ ዝተተኮሰ ቦምብታት ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ካብቲ ወይ ከዓ ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ካብቲ ናይ በዓል ሂሮሺማ ናጋሳኪን ዝተደብደበ ካብኡ ንላዕሊ ምዃኑ እዩ ዝንገር ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ሕሰብዎ እዚ ሲ መትሓዚ እኳ እዩ ዘይብሉ ስጋብ ዛለይቲ ሎሚ እቲ ሽዑ ዝተሰንደወ ቦምብታት ኣብተን ሃገራት በዓል ካምቦዲያ ስጋብ ሕጂ ሰብ ዝቐትል ዘሎ ምክንያቱ ገሊኡ ምስ ወደቀ ኣይፍንጀርኒዩ ተሓቢኡ ኣብ ትሕቲ መሬት ተቐቢሩ ይጸንሕ ሰባት ወይ ሓርሱ ክጅምሩ ከለው ወይ ገለ ክገብሩ ከለው ይፍንጀር ማለት እዩ
personal decision illegally and secretly they bombed Cambodia, a neutral country, back to the Stone Age.
The goal was to eliminate North Vietnamese supply lines and strongholds that were in Cambodia, but the response was carpet bombing. Carpet bombing is indiscriminate. It has unknown targets, which means that civilians usually get caught in the crossfire. So now you have B-52s raining down hell from the sky at all hours of the day. Homes were reduced to rubble. Entire villages were turned immediately into refugees. And what the record...
እዛ እልቢ ዘይብሉ ሰባት ኣብ ሙሉ ዓለም ዝጨፍጨፈትን ገና ትጭፍት ዘላ ኣሜሪካ እያ ብዲሞክራስን ብኻልእ ንብዙሓት ሃገራት ክትማሕፀንን ክትቀፅዕን ትስማዕን ትረኣይን ዘላ ሕጂ ዲሞክራሲ ዝበሃል ከም መጻወቲ መሳርሒ ይጥቀሙሉ ስለ ዘለው እዩ ሓንሳብ ዓለም ብዙሕ ግዜ ኣሽኪዕና ኢኸ ሕጂ ግን ኢናፍ ኢዝ ኢናፍ ዝብልዋ ዘለው ማለት እዩ እዚኣቶም ዘይቀተልዎ ዘይገበርዎ ክፉእ ነገርን የለን
shows that came out later is that all of this indiscriminate bombing, this slaughter from above, was approved by and then concealed by Henry Kissinger. This map that you're looking at is not some stylized representation of this. This is actual data. We have the data of every bomb, hundreds of thousands of bombs that were dropped.
ካምቦዲያ ዝተተኮሰ ቦምብታት ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ካብቲ ወይ ከዓ ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ካብቲ ናይ በዓል ሂሮሺማን ናጋሳኪን ዝተደብደበ ካብኡ ንላዕሊ ምዃኑ እዩ ዝንገር። ሓሙሽተ ዕፅፊ ሕሰብዎ። እዚ ሲ መትሓዚ እኳ እዩ ዘይብሉ ስጋብ ዛለይቲ ሎሚ እቲ ሽዑ ዝተሰንደወ ቦምብታት ኣብተን ሃገራት በዓል ካምቦዲያ ስጋብ ሕጂ ሰብ ዝቐትል ዘሎ ምክንያቱ ገሊኡ ምስ ወደቐ ኣይፍንጀርኒዩ ተሓቢኡ ኣብ ትሕቲ መሬት ተቐቢሩ ይጸንሕ ሰባት ወይ ክሓርሱ ክጅምሩ ከለው ወይ ገለ ክገብሩ ከለው ይፍንጀር ማለት እዩ።
Personal decision, illegally and secretly, they bombed Cambodia, a neutral country, back to the Stone Age.
The goal was to eliminate North Vietnamese supply lines and strongholds that were in Cambodia, but the response was carpet bombing. Carpet bombing is indiscriminate. It has unknown targets, which means that civilians usually get caught in the crossfire. So now you have B-52s raining down hell from the sky at all hours of the day. Homes were reduced to rubble, entire villages were turned immediately into refugees, and what the record...
እዛ እልቢ ዘይብሉ ሰባት ኣብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ዝጨፍጨፈትን ገና ትጭፍት ዘላ ኣሜሪካ እያ ብዲሞክራስን ብኻልእ ንብዙሓት ሃገራት ክትማሕፀንን ክትቀፅዕን ትስማዕን ትረአይን ዘላ ሕጂ ዲሞክራሲ ዝበሃል ከም መፃወቲ መሳርሒ ይጥቀሙሉ ስለ ዘለው እዩ ሓንሳብቲ ዓለም ብዙሕ ግዜ ኣሽኪዕኽና ኢኸ ሕጂ ግን ኢናፍ ኢዝ ኢናፍ ዝብልዋ ዘለው ማለት እዩ። እዚኣቶም ዘይቀተልዎ ዘይገበርዎ ክፉእ ነገርን የለን።
shows that came out later is that all of this indiscriminate bombing, this slaughter from above, was approved by and then concealed by Henry Kissinger. This map that you're looking at is not some stylized representation of this. This is actual data. We have the data of every bomb, hundreds of thousands of bombs that were dropped on Cambodia during this time. All in all, at least 100,000 Cambodians died in all of this. 2 million were made homeless. And this is in a country of only 7 million people.
لك أبز حجب وحدو للي 100,000 سبات كم استقتلون 3 مليون كم استبنزابلون أبتا 7 مليون نبرت زلوا كامبوديا إذنقرنا زلوا إذا حجي توحد كوسر إذنقرنا زلوا نغتل.
In total, the U.S. dropped 2,756,000 tons of bombs.
كلتنت بشو عت مليون تونس بومبي إنا بتعد تدربيو ولا تقصرون كتصوعوا خلخ أزيخ أخذ سنبت حسبوه.
Bombs on Cambodia. Many of these bombs went undetonated, turning the country into a minefield of undetonated explosives that still exist today. And perhaps more significantly, contributing to the destabilizing of this country, making way for a violent communist party to rise to power with a vengeance, leading to a mass genocide. All of this happened in secret, without the approval of Congress. It was Henry Kissinger, this one man, wielding his deftly gotten power to ruthlessly get what he wanted at any cost.
በቃ እዚ ብምልኡ ብዘይ ዝኾነ ይኹን ናይ ኣሜሪካ ተፈላጥነት ናይ ኮንግረስ እዩ ዝገብሮ ነይሩ ሄንሪ ኪሲንጀር እዩ ዝብለና ዘሎ እዚ ኣሜሪካዊ ምዃኑ ሪመምበር ከምኡ ዝበሃል ነገር የለን። ንምንታይ ከምኡ ይገብርዎ ነይሮም ዝብል ሕቶ ኣነ ንዓይ ክምልኣልኩም ይባዕለይ ንምንታይ ከምኡ ይገብር ነይሩ እንድሕሪልኩም ቪየትናምን ብፍላይ ቪየትናም ኣብ ክልተ ስለ ዝተመቕለት ሳውዝን ኖርዝን ተሓንቲ ናብ ብፍላይ ብላዕሊ ዘላ ቪየትናም ናብ ኖርዝ ዘላ ናይ ራሻ ጽልዋ ኣለዋ ወይ ትደናገጽ ኣብ ዝብል ዓይነት ኣተሓሳስባ ስለ ዝነበረ ኣሜሪካ ንዕኡ ደው ከብሉ ኪሲንጀር ድላዩ ንክገብር ፈቂዶም ልዮም ብሕቡእ ቶም ላዕለዎት ሓለፍቲ ሕጂ ኣሜሪካ ኣይትፈልጥን እያ ዝበሃል ነገር የለን ኢኖሰንት ክኾኑ ይጽውዕሩ ከም ዘለዉ ኢኻ ትሪኦ ዘለኻ ኣብዚ
As the endless war was near its end, peace negotiations kept breaking down. In response, Kissinger sent another round of brutal bombings around Christmas 1972 in an effort to force the North Vietnamese back to the negotiating table. And I'm not exaggerating here. Like Kissinger literally said, quote, "We bombed the North Vietnamese into accepting our concessions." Some historians argue that the bombings had little effect on the peace talks and instead only resulted in more pain, more death, and more destruction. And yet, this is where the story takes an insane turn. The next year, Henry Kissinger was given a Nobel Peace Prize.
ትሪእዎ ኣለኹም ዶ እዚ ኩሉ መሪሑ ሚልዮናት ሰባት ዘጥፍአ ሰብኣይ እዚ ኩሉ መሪሑ ዓለም ብምልእቲ ወይ እቶም ከባቢ ነዘን ሃገራት እዚኣተን ብምሉአን ዝገበረን ዘጥፍአን ሰብኣይ ንካምቦድያ 500,000 ዝቐተለ ኢስቲሞር 200,000 ዝቐተለ ኣብ ቺለ መንግስቲ ዝገልበጠ ኣብ ባንግላዴሽ 3 ሚልዮን ዘቕተለ ኣርጀንቲና 30,000 ዘቕተለን ዝተመዛበሉን ኣብ ላኦስ 200,000 ዘቕተለ ቪየትናም ካብ 2.5 ካብ 3 ሚልዮን ዘቕተለ ሰብኣይ እንታይ ተዋሂቡ ኖብል ፒስ ፕራይዝ እዚኣ መን ትዝብለኩም ኣብ ጎረቤትና ዘሎ ሰብኣይ ትዝብለኩም ዶ ልክዕ ትሪእዎ ኣለኹም ዶ ኖብል ፒስ ፕራይዝ ተባሂሉ ንምንታይ ኖብል ፒስ ፕራይዝ ተዋሂቡ እንድሕር ኢልኩም በቃ ሰላም ኣምፂኡ ኣብቲ ዞባ ተባሂሉ ባዕላቶም እኮ እዮም ዝኩሉ ዝሕምስዎ ነይሮም እዚ እቲ ታክቲክ ዝፅወት ኣብቲ ዞባ ኣብ ኩሉ ዓለም ዝሪኦ ዘለና
for brokering the ceasefire in Vietnam, an award given to him for ending a war that didn't actually end, an award that his North Vietnamese counterpart would decline. 2 members of the Nobel Peace Committee resigned in protest because of this.
It is as if everyone at the Olympic Stadium joined in carrying an athlete on their shoulders in an endless triumphal procession, without pausing to realize that in fact he had won no gold medals at all.
And Kissinger himself even felt weird about this and offered to give the medal back to the committee.
ልክ ኪሲንጀር ንርእሱ ሰንቢዱ እዩ ወይ ከዓ ኣይተጸበዮን ከምኡ ፒስ ናይ ኖቤል ፒስ ፕራይዝ ክወሃቦ ነቲ ክስታይ እንደገና ከም ዝመለሶ እዩ ኦፈር ከም ዝገበረ ከም ንኽመልሶ እዩ ዝነግረና ዘሎ ክልተ ካብቶም ነቲ ፒስ ፕራይዝ ዝህቡ ዝነበሩ ድማ ንሕና እዚ ኣይንቕበሎን ኢና ሕላና ኣይቅበሎን ብምባል ከም ዝወረዱ ይነግረና ኣሎ ትሪእዎ ኣለኹም ትፅወታ ኣብ ዓለም ዝግበር
Okay, this is one of the great parodies of the modern era that this ever happened, but it doesn't end here. In Chile in 1970, Kissinger directed the CIA to destabilize the country and seek to overthrow its recently elected socialist president. The coup attempt failed here, but it eventually did lead to the assassination of a Chilean general. The president was eventually overthrown and replaced by this Chilean general who would go on to kidnap, murder, and torture his political opponents. But because he wasn't a communist, Kissinger turned a blind eye. In fact, one of the features of Henry Kissinger during his time was cozying up to dictators all around the world, all in the name of securing America's place as the global superpower. He pledged his support for this Indonesian military dictator as he was invading East Timor using American weapons. We have this declassified document of the conversation between Kissinger and this military dictator. Kissinger telling this military dictator to move fast on his invasion and to not be too obvious about the fact that he's using US military weaponry in support. The dictator did move fast and soon was exterminating hundreds of thousands of people. Kissinger and his big powerful apparatus standing by to watch what they had sponsored. While illegally bombing Cambodia, Kissinger also oversaw illegal bombings in Laos. He supported Pakistan in their genocide against Bangladesh. He supported Turkey as they invaded Cyprus. He helped kick off US dependence on Saudi Arabia for oil in exchange for selling them weapons, a relationship that we're still bound to today. He supported coups and death squads across Latin America, and the list goes on and on and on.
I won't have it from him that he's doing this against communism. It's just another of the constituents of the gigantic lie that constitutes his reputation. He's a thug, and a crook, and a liar, and a pseudo-intellectual, and a murderer, okay? All of those things are factually verifiable. Factually verifiable.
I mean, listen, it was the Cold War. Like, again, none of us can really capture what that was like. You had 2 superpowers racing to see who could get more nuclear weapons. There was real fear here, and leaders had to make very difficult decisions. Defenders of Kissinger see all of this behavior that I've listed as just a leader living in the Cold War, having to do what it takes to avoid nuclear conflict. Or a communist takeover, a vital elder statesman serving America and making impossible decisions along the way. But the most vociferous critics tend to see the opposite. An evil genius who was given the full arsenal of American power, which he then wielded to achieve his grand vision of how the world should look. But when you look at the arc of Henry Kissinger's career, neither of these characterizations hold. He was not a master strategist or an unparalleled genius. In fact, he's a guy full of contradictions. He conspired to extend the Vietnam War despite thinking that the war was foolish. He joined the Nixon White House despite long maintaining that Richard Nixon was not presidential material. He orchestrated these increased bombings of Vietnam and Cambodia despite all evidence indicating that the US could not win this war. A reminder that Henry Kissinger grew up being bullied and beaten up for being a Jew in Nazi Germany. And then
ሕጂ ኣብ ጀርመን ዝዓበየ ጅው ምዃኑ ኣይትረስዑ ኣብ ዓለም ዳርጋ ዝበዝሑ ኣይሁዳውያን እዮም ዝዝርዋ ዘለዉ እንድሕር ኢልናኩም በዚ ምክንያት እዩ ማለት እዩ
he fled that brutality to come to the United States, where he studied how power works between countries, but also between people. He used those skills to navigate himself into standing in the most powerful places in the world, next to the most powerful people in the world, the most powerful military in the world at his disposal, and the permission to use it as he saw fit. Henry Kissinger knew what it took to stay on top. And what it took was shifting alliances, secret bombing campaigns, sabotaging peace talks, supporting dictators abroad, and the list goes on. I guess the point here is that Henry Kissinger's master guiding principle was to have no guiding principle. He infused that into his leadership, into his decisions, leading to the destruction of many lives around the globe, ripples that are still felt today. Even if Henry Kissinger were still alive, I believe he would never face true accountability for his actions. He played the game too well. He's too liked by powerful people on both sides of the aisle.
ካልኣይ ናብ ናይ ብዛዕባ ሰላም ዝምልከት እዚ ፕሬሲደንት ዝሃቦ ኣሎ ንዕኡ እውን ክልተ ገጻት ናይ ስቶሪ ኢና ንርኢ ዘለና ድሓን ንርአዮ ሞ እንታይ ከም ዝኾነ ክንርኢ ኢና
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave, or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women.
ብሓፂሩ እንታይ ኢና ንርኢ ዘለና ኣብዚ እቲ ብዛዕባ ፒስ ክትዛረብ ነዚኣቶም ነዞም ህዝቢ ኣዝዩ ቀሊል ምዃኑን እቲ ፖሊሲታት ዝሓናፅፅዎ ነታ ሰላም ዝበሃል ካብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ንክትጠፍእ ዝገብርዋ ግን ካልእ ምዃኑ ኢና ንርኢ እዚ ማለት እዩ
Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears.
ሕጂ እዚኣ ዝዝክርዎ ዘለኩም እዚ ፕሬሲደንት ከምኡ ኢሉ ክዛረብ ከሎ እዚ ሄንሪ ኪሲንጀር ስቲል ኣብ ዝለዓለ ጥርዚ ናይ ፓወር ናይ ምምኻርን ኣብ ካልእን ከም ዝነበረ ዘይምርሳዕ ማለት እዩ ምክንያቱ ኣገዳሲ ስለ ዝኾነ ብዛዕባ ፒስ ክዛረቡ ከለዉ እሳቶም እቲ ካርፔት ቦምብን ካልእ እንዳገበሩ ህዝብታትን ዓለም ከፅንቱ ከለውን ግን ካልእ ምዃኑ ዘይምዝንጋዕ
But we have no more urgent task. First, examine our attitude towards peace itself. Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man.
Look, ሕጂቲ ፒስ ሰላም ወይ ከዓ ኩናት ዝበሃል ቀጻሊ ክመጽእ እዩ ምክንያቱ እሱ ማን ሜድ እዩ ዝብል ዘሎ ኦፍ ኮርስ ኩሉ ግዜ ማን ሜድ እዩ እቲ ሽግር ባዕልኻትኩም ክሪኤት ከም ትገብርዎ ዝበዝሕ ፐርት ኣሜሪካውያን እዮም ክሪኤት ዝገብርዎ ኣብ ሙሉእ ዓለም ዝግበር ዘሎ ኩናትን እስካብ ሕጂ ንሪኦ ዘለና ማለት እዩ ሕጂ እቲ ስዊት ቶክ ዝበሃል እቲ ስኢልካ ጥዑም ዘረባ ምዝራብ ጥራይ ንዓለም ኣሰልችዋ
And man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. So let us persevere. Peace need not be impractical, and war need not be inevitable. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly towards it. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements. I think is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.
I think it's fair to say
ኣብዚ ድማ ኣብዚ ቀፂሉ ንሪኦ ድማ ብዛዕባ እቲ ኢኮኖሚክ ሂትማን ከመይ ገይሮም ንዓለም በዚ ናይ ኢኮኖሚክ ሂትማን ወይ ከዓ በዚ ናይ ኢኮኖሚ የዳኽምዋ ከም ዝነበሩ ይፃወትላ ከም ዝነበሩን እዚ ኣብኡ ስለ ዝነበረን ክንሪኦ ኢና ብኩሉ እዮም ዝመፅዋ ብኩናት ኣሎ በቲ ናይ ኢኮኖሚ ኣሎ ዓለም ብምልእታ በቲ ናቶም ኢንፍሉንስ ወይ ከዓ ስፌር ኦፍ ኢንፍሉንስ ድብሎ ብኡ ክትመፃሎም እዮም ዝፅዕሩ ነይሮም ካብ ቀደማት ሒዞም ስጋ ሕጂ ከምኡ እዩ ዝኸይድ ዘሎ
that since the end of World War II and increasingly in the most recent decades, we have managed to create the world's first truly global empire. And it's the first empire that's been created primarily without the military. It's been created by economic hitmen, by people like what I once was. And we work many different ways, economic hitmen, but perhaps the most common is that we will identify a third
ሕጂታ ይድብ ዘሎ ድሕሪ ካልኣይ ኩናት ዓለም ዛርጋ ብዙሓት ሃገራት ዝበሃላ ብዘይ ኩናት ዝተቆፃፀርናየን ኣለዋ እሱ ድማ በቲ ኢኮኖሚክ ሂትማን ዝበሃል ብናይ ኢኮኖሚ ማሕንቆታት ብኡ ኢና ንፃወተለን ነርና ከምዚ ናይ በዓልና ሳንክሽን እትዎ ዶላራት ይህቡኻ ፀንሑ እንዶ ብኡ ትሕነቕ ንስኻ ብኡ መውፅእን መእተውን ዘይብልካ ትኸውን እሱታት እዩ ትሪክ ናይ ኢኮኖሚ ሂትማን
world country that has resources our corporations covet like oil and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. But the money never goes to the country. Instead it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects, power plants, highways and
ልክ ሕጂታ ይድብ ዘሎ ተሃገራት እንተዳነዳድን ብዙሕ ሪሶርስን ተረኺብዎን ብናይቲ IMFን ብኻልእን ልቓሕ ከም ዝወሃበን ቢልዮናት ከም ዝወሃበን ይንገር እሞ እቲ ልቓሕ ግን ናብተን ሃገራት ኣይከይድን እዩ ትገንዘብቲ ቢልዮናት ተዋሂቡ ድበሃል ናብተን ናትና ዓበይቲ ትካላት ዝበሃላ ናይ ኣሜሪካን ናይ ምዕራባውያንን ናብ ኣተን እዩ ዝኸይድ ንሳተን እየን ነታ ሃገር ክሰርሓሉ ይወሃበን እቲ ቢልዮናት ዝኸውን ልቓሕ ንሳተን ድማ በትን ዓኣተን ዝጥዕመን ዓይነት ኣሰራርሓ እየን ዝኸዳ ነታ ሃገር ድማ እንዳመዝመዝኣ እየን ዝነብራ ልክዕ ፅግዕተኛ ኮይና ከም ትነብር እዮም ዝገብርኣ
industrial parks, things that benefit a few very rich people in that country as well as our own corporations, but don't help the majority of the people.
ልክ ሕጂታ ይድብል ዘሎ እቲ ልቓሕ ወይ ከዓ እቲ ትካላትና ንዓና ድወሃበን ዘሎ ካብቲ IMFን ወርልድ ባንክን ዝወሃብኦ ገለ ውሕዳት ደቂ ተዓዲ ይረብሑሉ እዮም ሃብታማት ዝበሃሉ ደቂ ተዓዲ ዘለቅሕዎን ወይ ከዓ ተናህና ትካላት እውን ይረብሓሉ እየን ካብኡ ሓሊፉ ተሪፉ ግን ነቲ ማጆሪቲ ዝበዝሐ ህዝቢ ናይተን ደቂ ዓዲ ዝረብሓ ዝበሃል ይብሉን
Or too poor to buy electricity, don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, don't own cars to drive on the highways, and yet those very people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt so that it can't pay for education and social services and health care for its people. In fact, the debt is so huge by intent that at some point we economic hitmen go back and we say, listen, you owe us a lot of money. You can't repay your debts, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without regard to the environment.
ልክ ሕጂ እንታይ እዩ ድብል ዘሎ ናብታ ዓዲ ንኸይድ እሞ እዚ ቢልዮናት ተለቂሕኩሞ ዘለኹም ዓቕሚ የብልኩምን ናይ ምኽፋል ስለዚ ደይትሸጡልና ማለት ዕዳኹም መኽፈል ይኾነኩም እቲ እንዳነዳድን እናዋርቕ እንደለኩም ናይ ሪሶርስስ ንዓና ሽጡልና እሞ ንሕና በብቁሩብ ክሳይ ክንገብሮ ኢልና ኢና ንኣትዎም ሕጂ እዞም እቶም ኢኮኖሚክ ሂትማን ዝበሃሉ እዮም ብድሕሪት ዝኣትዉ ዘለዉ ሓደ ካብኣቶም ኣነ ነይረ ኢሉ ዝመስክር ዘሎ ንሱ
Vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote. Send troops in support of ours to some place in the world like Iraq. And in that way we've created this empire. On the few times when we economic hitmen fail, as I talk about in the books, as I failed in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos and in Panama with Omar Torrijos, then the jackals go in. And these are men, maybe a few women, who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders.
لك هجي كما أسألتاناتو تي إيكونومي هيتمان دحربتاو توم جاكالس تبلون ويكا كالوت جوجل لو ساتهم تأم زجبرو منجستي نايم أنسال نايم علاو سرح يصرحو نعاتهم زتعمهم منجستي نعاتهم كربوهم زغل بوليسيات زحنت منجستي كفر خبلو لهم مالتيزي.
So if I'm unable to bring them around, if the economic hitman is unable to bring them around through legal means, what we do is we use legal means through the World Bank, but it's basically corrupting the leaders of these countries. If we're unable to corrupt them, then...
لك زبازح جزي بتي حقاوي زمثل إنا نتكم زي عن السيستم تنا إيكونومي هيتمان نتكملو سدما بنا وورلد بانك بتي وورلد بانك أتينا بخوم إنا السيستم نتكملو نتم دك تعدي ويحلفتي ويقله قربت نقبرهم جنزب استوى سنة مليونات نهبهم مو أب جبو ندهبنا إنا نقص أسرنا تعدي إزمزلو.
The jackals go in and take care of them. So when I failed with Jaime Roldos in Ecuador and Omar Torrijos in Panama, the jackals assassinated them. And if the jackals fail, which is what happened in Iraq, both the economic hitmen and the jackals failed with Saddam Hussein, then, and only then, does the military go.
هجي لك كمتي كسمعوت أنكم انتدأ أتوم إيكونومي هيتمان فيل جيروم انتدأ نساتهم زي تعوتوا لك كمزي أب إيران زرأخمو كلتيو أتوم جاكالن أتوم إيكونومي هيتمان أتيوم نتي نتعدي يقوت أتروا مو دلايوم كا يسرح لا يزبل زلو.
So this is the first empire in the history of the world that's been created primarily without the military. The military only as a last resort. And I think there's something extremely dangerous about this. It's not just that it's pathetic. It's not just that it goes against all of our most sacred documents. It's extremely dangerous because we claim to be a democracy. And a democracy is built on the assumption that the electorate is informed. And if the electorate doesn't realize what we're doing internationally, if the electorate doesn't understand the main basis of our foreign policy, which is what I've just described, then the electorate is not informed and therefore cannot vote intelligently. And therefore you even have to question whether we're truly a democracy.
Just very briefly.
لك أجيتاي قبل أن يحونا أوكمل سوكمي قدمنا بهيلاري كلينتون مسجارنا بجمرتها أتي كلتي زي إيكونومي هيتمان توم جاكالن زبلون يفتنوا بزي بكوينات كي أتو مالتي السنة تدا فيل جيرو يوتي بأكلنا أتو بكويناتنا أتو يدبل زلو سلازم بقى أتي أبعدهم زلو أتي سب زمر زلو ديمقراط دو ولا جلز بحالك مرت كله بزعبا زغبر زنبره شجرات سكابج زغبر هاجراتنا مرباش نجارات أيحبرون يوم سبعة سلزي فلت ديمقراط يمرت ولا تحد يمرت بزح إنفورميشن سلزي بلو بزح زوم تقولوتي يبلون يزبزلو هيلاري كلينتون دما زغبروا بزح تنقلات بعلا كتنا صحيح نسمعها.
In Libya, because that was on my watch.
But this is not again.
No, but I want to make a larger point because you know. Gaddafi was a bad actor. Everybody knew he was a bad actor, and he threatened to kill his people by cockroaches. The United States was actually the supporter of European countries through NATO and the Arab League, which for the very first time came and said, we want to be part of trying to protect the people of Libya. Now, so I feel that that particular intervention, we had certain capabilities militarily that nobody else had, which we used to assist them. But, you know, the Emiratis were flying and the Jordanians were flying, etc. The problem, and this is where I think you make a really good point. The problem is, okay, Gaddafi's gone. His horrible prisons are emptied. What comes next?
Right. That's
what comes next?
And that's always a problem because there's always a vacuum. Because look, dictators don't allow institutions to flourish. So when you take
ماشام كلتي انزئاتن زحنتي رايز زحنت قا كلينتونيا اب عالم زي قبرو اكفو نغرات يلن ንቡል الزوبانا سقاب حجي زصلو زلو بزعبا غدافي كتزارب كلا كتحفر يزغبا ህዝቡ ይጭፍጭፍ ነሩ ከምዚ ይገብር ነሩ ዶ ምስኒቶ ተሓባቢርና ድማ ንዑ አመጥፋ ኢድና ሓዊስና ፕላስ ብድሕሪኡ እሱ መስከደ ዝመጽ ሕቶ ኢላንሳ እሱ መስከደ መን ይተካአዮ ዝብል ሕቶታት እዩ ነሩ ነታ ዓዲ ስጋብ ሕጂ ስጋብ ዛለይት ዝሎም ዲኣ ሓንሳብ ሓፍታር ሓንሳብ ገለ ዝበሃሉ ይርቡሽዋ ከም ዘለው መን ይተቆጻጽርዋ ተዓዲ ዘይፍለጥ ሊቢያ ደርጋ يوروب لعل يوروب كمان تغيرات لزنبر جزيات بوزحات بوزح حلفنا إيرتراويان وإذا حلفكم تفلتوا وياهم دحين سمعوه
the dictator out there are no institutions.
That's right.
So that's but the question becomes, do you then say let Gaddafi go ahead and kill his people because it's going to be hard afterwards, or in our case we thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, you're going to let that continue or are you going to take him out and then do the best that you can in helping people to
تري والله حجنا بي زيرا تمص كم زلا نسب كنحجزينا نحنا ديمقراطينا نحنا هيومن رايتس علينا نحنا ندنقصلينا نت حزب ليبيا وين حزبي عراق وين حزبي كستاي ناباياتا تمزز سازربا زيرا نابايا تمصاكا مالتي حجي لك مو غدافي سقيلو حزب دو يچفچف ويس نت حزب مسكينايك انتاي غبره ز عينوتو زربا تزارب زلا حجي رايس تزغرميو مو كمزه حمز حجي زلا سولد ليبيا تحيش مرحي ايفلت كل حساب يچفچف كل حساب تچفاچفو ندحريت نستون ايج مليسون ما نتعدي استي تعلامهم نيرو مخنياتو غازافي نتعدي بطعم يصبو اخيدوا بلاس ناي جول ديبوزيت ديو ناي قال اندا غبره كخيد حسب يخير سلازنبره ازيو زلا على بلانات حسب سلازنبره اتي بروجرامهم تاع نيرو زي نافريقا ابنت كخوني يبلون كابتيناتنا اي ام اف وورلد بانكن زخيز نبر اسرارحاتات يورص سلازلو ازي حديو كنغبر علينا زبل بروبوزات نيروم تغوايوم كا اتيوم مالتي
recover you have to recognize that it's going to be hard once you take the dictator out. But John, it's a little bit of a false choice to say, well then just leave the dictator in place because it won't be chaotic. It may not be chaotic.
I guess what I'm saying is
it may not be chaotic.
If we take
but
that
it might
role
be brutal
on,
against the people.
If we take that role on, can we sustain as a country? You know, when you think about the Soviet Union's collapse, they overextended and they got in an arms race with us and they had all these satellites. Are we overextending America's power, especially militarily, when you talk about an $800 billion defense budget?
Let's assume instead of being in a podcast studio, we were in a situation room, or in the tank in the Defense Department, wherever we were. Right. Okay, and we're saying, okay, what do you see on the horizon? Well, North Korea is shooting these missiles over our ally, Japan.
Right.
China is trying to build up its blue water navy so that it can compete with us anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. You've got, the Russia-China relationship. It's tricky, but we have to watch it really carefully because we don't know where that might lead. We've got Iran, still a very bad actor, and probably in addition to killing their people, will cause some external problems in order to take people's minds off it. We have a lot of issues. So
أبز حجي جنرالي حفشاو كنزارب تر أوينا أمريكا كم سلام أو حسيد كوينا أتزارب زلا ويك أتقرب زلا حفشاوي كتزارب كلا كلينتون تي ماجوريتنا أمريكا بوليسيتات ياتنقر زلا يسامعوا لسلازنو يخونو سقاب زليت لهم خاهم سليت غيد زلا يتزارب زلا هو نا كيسنجر ندحر رأيهم مون نسيو نا أمريكا دوميننس ويك عبلاله أب سلطان نممتع أبقدامنت مبالي وتي نا كيسنجر سريحو مليونات قوصير كازي ود سبات دما أهليقو حجي ناي بعل حالايتي حالاي ناي ليبيا كوينات مص حالايتنا عراق كوينات مص زن هاغرات زياتن انتاي رخيبن ديمقراسي اسبتر اخوينو ديمقراسينا ايخون كابزوم حزب زيامون كابزوم هاغرات زياتومن والحنتي صبو نغار زوص دحر حجي ايكهلوني قدم حجون اينبران 4 نطب كنغبرلا بزيا.
Do we just sit back and hope for the best, or do we try to be positioned in enough places with enough support that we can be a good ally to those who are counting on us?
And you have to watch the potential rise of terrorism again. So you have a lot on your plate. But I would just say...
إذا terrorism إذا قال ما إذا بمولو مجمرتها بعلاتهم كرئيت زجبروا ويم بعلهم زدالوا ويم حزبات علم بمولو زبصقوا بعلاتهم يم زدالوا كل زبز حق زي زدالوا ونساتهم يم. إرترا كقدوا خلوا أب كل تشحن جاءتن مسألة شباب تحجز كيو إلهم بنصاريو نقال شباب إيرترا خدت في إلى تقايس لزنبرت ساتهم جن نوع كريت قبروا لزنورون نقال شباب إيرترا أنصارهم دوس لزبالتيا أجدأتهم له إزي تحق كل سبب فلت أزله إزي أتهم حاليهم ما يفلتون كحاليون دحر حجة يقولون كل سبب تحق فلت له.
Should the United States be selective in the use of its military power?
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right.
After Afghanistan and Iraq, which we did for security reasons, not because we wanted to spread democracy at gunpoint, but for security reasons.
Although ultimately we were told that spreading democracy would make the world safer because freer countries would
I think if you
spreading حجي ديمقراطي مسفعفاها يمزبلوا أنساتهم تقالا زراربهم democracy is coming نحن تباهيلو أبزغون يكون عالم لومي تفلت وزل لكم البزي يقولوا كيناتنا من قد دخانا بجزا خاي متسق كم زلوا فلتو بشم ديمقراطي زي عنوان هاجرات يلون أزي مشكات يتقبروا شجور كوتينج كم زقبروا زحلة فجزي حدا لعلوه حلا فأمسينا لكم نيرنا أزي ديمقراطي زقلة ملز بهر رسعوه نحنا شجور كوتينج عندك أمور نيرنا بق خمزي مشفني ندلينا عنا مرة حنا خنتقومولو كم شجر كوتين إنا نتقومولو نيرنا كم زبالة كذكركم يدلي.
If you actually look at the record, democratic countries actually don't invade their neighbors. Democratic countries don't harbor terrorists. Democratic countries don't use weapons of mass destruction. So I think
they don't harbor them, but they have them.
Well,
you can't. It'd be hard to. I mean, that was planned in
but they're not aided and supported by government.
And the always.
That is a distinction.
But always try to look at the converse, right?
Yes.
Just because they have in some of these weak states terrorists among them, would you rather have somebody who's actually harboring them and assisting them?
Understood.
So that's the first point. The second point is that yes, we need to be more selective, but I would be the strongest voice, as I know Hillary is, when Vladimir Putin decides to extinguish his neighbor. Should the United States really just step back from that and say, well, you know, that's kind of your business after all. Ukraine's been a part of the Russian Empire and so forth. And there are some people in the United States who would say, not in Ukraine, let's do it in Des Moines. And I think that is
okay. أب يوكرين نرأسو كن ليس مويت اللوك ساب ليت لومي إلكم حساتو تسأب أزيو كم زجاج أو كوانتو هنا مليونات سباتيوم أشحات سباتيوم قطرهم زي بلوم يوم مويتهم زلوا أزي in the name of democracy مالتيو أزي كل ربحات أمريكا نموحس تجبريو ناي هنري كيسنجر كرايم برا كتب صبالكم دجنا أب كامبوديا ألبزي بلو سبات فيو استيموركم وتشيلكم وبنغلاديش أرجنتينا بمول ولا بزوبانا كي تعرف متينيريو مسؤال أبون أنوار سادات كي تعرف تزراري بونيريو بزعبانا إيرترا إثيوبيان قدايات انتهى يكون أبزبل إيرترا إثيوبيان بفلان إيرترا أبتي جزء ناس نتحيلوا بزخدل زنبورو إيرترا وين أبتي قالسي إيرترا ناس إنهم مركبوا ما يترفنيو يبل كم زنبرة يو زنقرلو زي كسينجر انتخونا حجي متأرشا كت متبالكم ويك ود علكم تحسب ناب جنة يخيد ويس ناب سيول متشم أم مدري زي ترخبة فردسات أبلع علي كرخبو صولتنا كنعرق إنا مالتيو إذا حجي هنري كيسنجر حدا كابتوم مليونات وأشحات نعلم بالإتي بس بيصوم ما زلوا مخوانو أي ترسعوا مغنياتو بوليسي أم فلت بوليسي تاتي زلوهم كم تري ودلهم we steal 100% of their resources and give them 1% of the benefit and call it foreign aid 80% نايتي زلوهم resources نسرق 1% دما benefit نهو مس دما foreign aid لنا شمنو تقالو زبولو سبعة يمزيهم سوازياتهم thank you دكيري مسايد أنا حكم أزاي مسكن كتوت خلهم share like subscribe قبروا نزي channel زي support بمقبر دقفكم عرينا thank you
سلا بحرة أخرانا قول قلاب حدر لنا تنوار قلا منك قربا قلق به وطي كما حوات